Hi, I'm Ryan, and today's post-debate analysis will be about under the motion. This house would unify all space institutions, right? We'll be discussing just a few important issues regarding this motion, and moving on to the first issue would be what is happening in status quo, and are there any urgency to impose this unification? Government side of the house can start portraying how this space exploration works, right? They may argue and describe that space exploration is a race in technology. Now, this means, for example, manufacturing the best rockets, space shuttles, and artificial satellites by these space institutions, and they would send these kind of technology for an asteroid mission. What's its purpose, right? They may argue that this is for maybe exploring new resources in space, and probably to the level of planet's environmental alteration programs, right? In order to for it to become inhabitable, and to the extent of reaching the ultimate goal, which is finding a new inhabitable planet because Earth is dying and no longer sustainable. This might be due to the excessive natural resource exploitations by human race, thus causing global warming, etc. And therefore, Earth isn't going to be suitable for the human race to begin with, right? And as opposed to opposition, opposition may respond and argue about in current status quo, space exploration is indeed a race of technology, right? But they'll also argue that this unique goals and exclusive interests brought by these individual institution, they are so exclusively different between one of them that it makes it possible for these institutions to apply efficient execution in missions and researches, right? What I mean by this is that they have one specific goal, and therefore, what anything they do would be simply trying to achieve that goal. The goal brought by this ideology part of the governments would be unifying this goal. Now, as comparison to opposition, is that not all space institutions will try to race under the notion who's going to occupy Mars first, right? But probably some other institutions may focus on how water is going to be made in Mars, for instance, or maybe as simple as counting stars, since space is an endless void, and for example, right? So individual objectives will be more attainable than collective objectives that is going to happen when you are going to unify. There's all these space institutions. Now, government side of the house may also argue and bring up the idea that um, this how do I say this, right? This race of technology that they have been talking about happens in both state and private space institutions. Now, by combining all those different interests, right, they eventually have one goal, which is space exploration. Now, this will unite a solid organization that focuses on the same goal rather than competing for new space informations and claims for recognition for non-universal benefits. For instance, that there is space information out there. Now, let's say if NASA reaches this space information or technology or some sort of let's say advancements, the credit system will actually belong to NASA, right? So this is what I mean by by competing its recognition between these institutions, which we think it is not important when it comes to seeing the ultimate goal of space exploration, which is moving on to a new planet, right? Now, opposition may argue about, in fact, um, problematic issues, for example, in Earth, is actually still currently working. For instance, innovating renewable energy resources to combat global warming and environmental policies to prevent overexploitation of natural resources is actually a way for us to thrive that Earth is in fact still sustainable, and therefore we do not want to go outside Earth. And fixing these kind of problems just shows how human races are still having responsibility on Earth, right? And moving on to the next issue, which would be how would this unification and funding system work, right? Now, governments at the House can come up with the idea that this unified space institution will be under a global organization, which means scrutiny, accountability will be held among all countries, forming a strong collaboration, right, among all authorities, which means uniting one all interests into saving humanity and eliminate competition, as mentioned before. Now, this means investors can only come from countries itself. Now, why is this so? Because how space institution works, right? There's always going to be an injection of capital, either if it's from countries or it may also come from investors. Thus, understanding when it comes to technology, researching and advancements in this kind of area, you really need a lot of money and funding. As response towards that, opposition side of the House may argue that this unified space institution under a global organization will not be effective. Why? Since all countries and corporates have diverse sets of interests, as mentioned before. Now, this sets of interests actually becomes their background when it comes to um, decision making, for instance, right? So collaboration will be so hard to conduct since conflict of interest among countries or even corporates are going to be so strong from the first place. An example would be the United States of America and also China. We think their bond is really hard to mend together, and therefore collaborating in such big power, especially as a unified space institution, I think there's going to be a battle between power, right? Even though the government side of the House may argue bargaining of power will be reduced because of this unification system. For example, it already applied in United Nations and other international organizations where countries sit together and exchange mindsets in order for them to share the same benefits, right? Now, this is not going to happen. Why? Because competition is indeed going to be so real, it's going to be so big, and therefore, in fact, opposition is going to embrace this kind of competition between companies, between corporates and also countries, because this competition creates a healthy competition to thrive innovation a lot more faster. Now, this means the race in technology is going to be far more better than monopolizing this space technology for like space institutions and space exploration. And the government side of the House, to the extent, may also argue about the ideal situation would be that human race shares equal funding and impose a non-discriminatory system, which means that there will be no equity share power which can influence other parties, right? Now, this means decision making will be based on comprehensive institution meetings and a set of priorities according to its beneficial value. Now, what I mean by this, in current status quo fundings, for example, investors, the more they invest their capital towards this organization, this means that there is a lot of supporting power in order for them to run the institution, right? Without these investors from or funding from the first place, it's going to be hard for these institutions to work and begin with, and therefore there is going to the opposition party will argue that indeed these investor providers should have a position because they are the one that supports and give the fundamental more how do I say this incentives for the institutions to run, right? Now this is not according to be this is in fact a discriminatory system because of what the ones that will make decisions from the first place are going to be the ones with power, the ones that um, invest more, which means they have more voice over other nations or corporates. And we think this is unfair. Why? Because as mentioned before, as they have united the goal, which is saving humanity and stuff, and just moving to Earth and trying to find a new habitable planet. And I think unifying that goal means that everybody has one interest, and therefore we don't need this kind of how do I say, this power to influence other people. In fact, this is going to oppress and discriminate other countries, which government side house does not want that, right? The opposition may respond by stating that equal funding system will actually never work from the first place. If the government side house would apply that every country should fund the exact same amount, it is not going to be fair. Why? Since all parties or countries they do not have the same economic capital. Why so? Equally distributing funding bills among all countries will be unfair because it actually burdens developing countries, for instance, which we know that developing countries have a lot of problems that they have to solve with to solve, but also they are tied with multiple debts. How are funding from these developing countries going to power up these institutions by the whereas in contrary these developing countries have debts to pay first, right, before they step in to paying a higher goal, which is like moving outside Earth itself. And why is this so harmful, right? Because when it comes to economic capital and technology research, it's never cheap. Why do I say so? Because to in fact to actually launch a rocket, it costs so much due to the amount of research conducted, right? The research conducted, which means engineering and stuff, for safety causes, and in fact, all of these research is going to be about how to reduce the percentage of failure, right? How to, in fact, save humanity by this constructive engineering, and therefore we can go to Mars safely. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of trials and errors, and therefore, the injection of capital from the investors are clearly needed in the process. So, this is how opposition will argue to counter the funding system that is going to work brought by the proposition side of the House. Sorry about that. And government side of the House may also argue to respond that in fact that equally funding will be required for all countries to fulfill is not actually going to be a problem from the first place.